Well, in this fourth presentation, we're considering the question, what do we mean when we say that Jesus rose from the dead? Well, let's take it by looking at the season of Easter itself. It's the season of Easter that celebrates the central truth, what is most important for us as followers of Jesus. The Jesus who was so cruelly put to death by the selfishness and jealousy and fear of others rose from the dead. It's the proclamation that we call the resurrection. This is the cornerstone of our belief. If Christ is not risen from the dead, then our faith is in vain, wrote St. Paul. He went on to say, if there is no resurrection of the dead, Christ himself cannot have been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is useless and your believing is useless. And so the Christian is the one who believes that Jesus, the one from Nazareth, has risen from the dead. It's a little saying, Jesus rose from the dead. Only 5 words. But in this little saying is an extraordinary richness that can reorient our whole life. It opens up for us a whole new way of living, because it offers us a possibility about ourselves and beyond our imagination. It's a saying that enables us to see our life in a whole new way. It's a saying that if we take to heart and believe, gives us a peace, a courage, and a purpose, especially when we are confronted with the reality of selfishness, of darkness, and of evil in ourselves, in others, and in the world around us. I'd like to share with you simply how I understand what the word resurrection means. Sometimes I think we're tempted to think of resurrection simply as resuscitation. We think of resurrection of Jesus as resuscitation of Jesus, that somehow Jesus got up out of his tomb and walked around as if he, in the same way that he had been before. But as Pope Benedict wrote some years ago, of course, the resurrection of Jesus was not simply a return to the life that he had before. In that case, it would have been simply something in the past, as if 2,000 years ago somebody was raised and returned to the life he had before. But no, as the Pope wrote, the resurrection is something that's situated in another dimension. It is the passage, as he wrote, to a profoundly new dimension of life, so that it now concerns us, involving the entire human family, history, and the universe. The resurrection of Jesus, therefore, is something far more complex, something far more wonderful than simple resuscitation. And Jesus was not resuscitated after he died. He was resurrected. Well, what do we mean by this proclamation of the resurrection? I believe we mean 2 things. The first thing we mean is that Jesus lives now. He is present to us as we are to one another, interacting, informing, influencing us, just as we interact, inform, and influence each other. In other words, Jesus is not just a memory or an idea. He's not just an historical figure who might inspire us or motivate us to lead good lives. No, rather he is a living person with whom we can interact and who, by his presence, influences us. Well, having said this, a question might immediately rise in our minds and in our hearts. How does he do this when we cannot see him? I can interact with you, inform you, and influence you because I have a body, because you can see me and hear me and touch me. So this brings us to the second thing that we proclaim by our belief in the resurrection. And that is, if Jesus continues to live, he does so in a body that is real, physical, and present. But what is this body in which Jesus lives? The body in which I live and through which you can see and hear and touch me and by which you can interact with me is the not so glamorous body that you see in front of you. But this body is bound in time and in space. Once I'm gone, I'm no longer present to you. But the body in which Jesus lives now is not like the body as the one I have. Because Jesus lives now in the body which is the community of his friends. His friends together are his body, the body in which he lives. In other words, Jesus lives in the body that is formed when we come together as his friends. Together in our following of him, we form a new body in which Jesus lives, and through which others can see and hear and touch him. And so the body of the risen Christ is the physical reality of the community of his disciples, the church, which we in fact call the sacrament of the risen Christ. The great sacramental theologian Chauvet put it profoundly this way. He said, "The absent one is present in his sacrament, which is the church. The church rereading the scriptures with him in mind. The church repeating his gestures in memory of him. The church living the sharing between brothers and sisters in his name." It is in these forms of witness by the church that Jesus takes on a body and shows himself to be encountered. He goes on to say, very significantly, that it is precisely in the integration of these three elements that we touch the risen Christ. Where we try to capture him in only one of these three, we end then, as he writes, with an illusory and fatal capture of the living one. No, rather, Jesus takes on a body now as his friends come together and reread the story of his life, as they reenact the gestures he himself gave us, particularly in the celebration of the Eucharist, and in the quality of the way in which we live in openness to one another. And so to believe in the resurrection of Jesus is at one and the same time to believe in the church, the community of his friends, the community that comes into being as his friends join together to live his life. We can't therefore have a deepening belief in the resurrection without a growing appreciation of the church and of the whole sacramental life by which the life of Jesus is made present to us now. Herein, however, lies a problem. For we know that the experience of both church and sacramental celebration is often an ambiguous one. But this is, I think I would be so bold as to suggest, the scandal of the resurrection. That is, the risen Christ incarnates, enfleshes in an historical reality that can be experienced with such ambiguity. This indeed can be a difficult word for those of us who have personally at times experienced the church, not as a conduit for a discovery of the risen Christ, but rather as an obstacle. Yet this stumbling, stuttering, motley group of people, full of idiosyncrasy, vulnerability, and ambiguity, remains the sacrament of the risen one, the body of the one whom we proclaim lives even now. And therefore our desire to meet the risen Christ meets a challenge. Can we love the church in all of its paradox? This scandal can be too confronting for those who want a risen Christ present in a kind of immediate, ethereal way, in a kind of unblemished way. But if we want to touch the risen Christ, we must be prepared to confront an all too human reality, and that is the present community of his disciples, the church. Yes, we, in all of our weakness and vulnerability, are the body of the living Christ. As the community of friends of Jesus, we bear his life so that his life can be seen and heard and touched by others. The celebration of the resurrection then places an extraordinary responsibility and accountability on us. Does our life together as a community of persons demonstrate the features of the risen Christ? Does our attitude to one another, our welcome to one another, our interest in one another, the quality of our care for one another, show forth the presence of the Christ, the one who lives now in us, through us, with us, and by us? 400 years ago, a great friend of Jesus, Saint Teresa of Avila, wrote this wonderful prayer. She wrote, "Christ has no body now on earth but yours, no hands but yours, no feet but yours. Yours are the eyes through which to look out on Christ's compassion to the world. Yours are the feet with which he is to go about doing good. Yours are the hands with which he is to bless people now." And so, celebrating the resurrection of Jesus, let us celebrate his life present and given to us now. But let us also pause in the knowledge that in the resurrection we have become the body which bears his life to others. It's in our commitment to one another and the quality of our life together that the world will be blessed with the presence of the one whom we proclaim to be risen and alive.